Okay, guys, here we go. Second of two. I'm going to cruise on over here and start the slideshow. And we'll talk a little bit about information cascades. Information cascades are closely related to groupthink. They're another socially powered way that we can get put information into the average person and harvest a bumper crop of bullshit. Don't worry, I'm going to define the terms right now. It's not actually as complicated as it sounds. Let's start with heuristics. A heuristic is a kind of a mental shortcut, and substitution is one of them. A heuristic is a kind of mental shortcut, a rule of thumb which people use to arrive at a good enough understanding of a complicated situation. For instance, you're evaluating two political candidates. Part of your mind is trying to keep track of everybody's position on the issues and examining their records and watching the debates and poring over the voters' pamphlet. That part of your mind is really overworked. There's a lot of information to keep track of, but there's another part of your mind that has already decided that candidate A looks more presidential than candidate B. That part of your mind applied a heuristic to the solution, or to the decision, something that Daniel Kahneman calls substitution. It substituted an easy question for a tough question. So instead of asking which of these candidates is more qualified, it asked which of these candidates is more hot. That last question is a heuristic question. Now, Kahneman refers to these two parts of your brain as System 2 and System 1. This is a hard paradigm to keep in memory. It's hard to remember, which one is System 1, which one is System 2. I wouldn't have done it that way, but I'm not Daniel Kahneman, so I'm not going to hate. System 1 is the brain that wants to vote for candidate A because he looks like George Clooney. And System 2 is the hard-working one that you have to force yourself to use. I think that the best way to remember System 1 from System 2 is that the first place that your mind is going to go is going to be the easy place, and that's going to be 1. System 1 first. And then System 2 is, a larger number and more hard to arrive at and so on. So, yeah, that may help. Okay, so let's say you're managing the crappier candidates campaign of two candidates. What you want to do is clear. You want to, first of all, keep the water muddy so that everyone's System 2 is kept struggling to parse the data until it gives up. And second, keep your candidate's simple, straightforward System 1 friendly message in front of them at all times, building warm fuzzies for System 1 and hoping the voter will give up and use the principle of substitution. This is literally the playbook for the 2016 election. It's complicated. We don't know if we can trust the media, fake news, blah, 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 blah. Why don't you just give up and vote for the one that you feel fuzziest about? That was a successful strategy. There's a whole litany of heuristics. All of them have names. All of them represent shortcuts that the human mind has developed for coming up with a good enough answer to issues most of the time. And all of them represent weak spots in our bullshit shields because we use these heuristics in a predictable way. So it works great if a random universe is throwing things at you. Using a heuristic to figure out how to deal with them is usually a successful way to do it. If the universe isn't random, if what's throwing things at you is a person who knows how you probably will react out of heuristics, then they're going to custom craft a situation knowing how you're going to respond to it, and it's going to play right into their plans. So that's why heuristics are important for bullshitting, because they represent a non-thinking reaction to a situation that your history, your evolutionary history, if you will, interprets as random. But the smart people who are playing this game are making sure that it's not random at all. They're putting the money in and they're getting the gumball out. It's a predictable pattern in how we react to stuff, and we don't even notice because it's just how we are. Don't think for a minute that the bullshitters haven't noticed these things. No, we mentioned substitution. So you're choosing a question: which candidate is better qualified for the responsibility of office, or which candidate looks better in a business suit? The next one is the affect heuristic. Example that I've given here is that Bob test drives a new Audi and loves it, so when he's calculating whether he can afford it, he unconsciously underestimates the negatives and overestimates the benefits of having an expensive Audi. So this is the one in which you subconsciously, or maybe not so subconsciously, let your emotions manipulate you. Say irradiated food creeps you out. So you underestimate the benefits and overestimate the risks of irradiated food. Say you survive a terrifying plane crash. You underestimate the risk, overestimate the risk of it ever happening again. So making decisions with the affect heuristic is essentially like going with your gut. Oftentimes it's the best thing that you could possibly do. But if somebody knows how to manipulate your gut without you realizing that it's being manipulated, you are a puppet on a string. Yeah. So there's the affect heuristic. We have the anchoring effect. And now this is one of the most popular ones. Or not popular, but powerful. This is critically important, and knowing about the anchoring effect is probably going to save you thousands of dollars throughout your life. And I'm going to tell you why. Okay, like the example I've got here, Bob the jewelry salesman raises the asking price on all the diamonds by 60% and puts 50% discount stickers on them so that the customers will anchor on the higher amount as the diamond's perceived value. Okay, the anchoring effect is what happens when there's a number anywhere in sight when you're setting a price. So I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to ask you if Gandhi was older or younger than 114 years old when he died. You will say younger. If you think Gandhi was older than 114 years old, you're trolling me, right? Everybody knows he was younger. Now I'm going to ask you to guess how old he was. Got a number in mind? Good. What is it? Well, you can't tell me. I'm talking to a piece of glass right now, but I'm going to guess that you estimated and you came up with a number between 70 and 90. Okay? I'm going to guess that. I could be wrong. Now, rewind. Erase all of that stuff in your mind and pretend I'm asking you the question for the first time. I'm saying, hey, was Gandhi older or younger than 35 years old when he died? Well, of course he was older than 35. Everybody knows that. But then when I asked you to give a guess, you probably would have come up with, 55, 65, 75, somewhere in there. Of course, I've spoiled it because you know where we're going with this, and you can't really rewind your mind because all that stuff is happening subconsciously. But that is the anchoring effect. Here's another one. Guess the median price of all cars by German automakers, including Volkswagen. Or guess the median price of all cars by German automakers, including Mercedes-Benz. If I divided our class up into two sections and asked one set of you one of those question variants and the other, you would come up with two very different numbers. The anchoring effect is, in some markets, why there's a suggested retail price that nobody ever actually pays. Because it's like, oh, wow, that's now I'm going to feel that is my sense for how much that thing is worth. And Kahneman says, with the anchoring effect, if you're in a negotiation situation and somebody trots out a number real early and it's a number that is as it would be, they were trying to get you anchored on it. He says the only thing you can do is get up and walk out of the room and say, we will continue discussions when that number is no longer on the table. And he says even that doesn't always work. This is one of those things that happens whether you know about it or not. The representative heuristic now. Example 1, it's cold as hell outside and Bob is thinking the global warming thing is ridiculous. Example 2, the Milwaukee Brewers scout signs Bob on the team because his looks and style of play are just like Pete Rose at his age. Right? Okay. The representative heuristic. This is the one where we say, well, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. That's usually how the world works. Old guys in Buick Park Avenues usually drive real slow and sometimes crash into bus stops. People who smoke meth are usually self-destructive, dangerous people. People who attend college are usually young. but sometimes they're not, right? So now here's an example of the representative heuristic at work. You see a well-dressed woman wearing glasses, sitting at the bus stop reading Shakespeare. Is it more likely that she is a graduate student in English literature, or B, an undergraduate at one of the science and engineering schools? Well, by now you know this is a trick question, so you may have just answered the counterintuitive answer, knowing that that's what's going to be the real answer to this. Here's the thing. There are about 10,000 science and engineering undergraduates on this campus and about 20 graduate students in English. Actually, I think there may be fewer than that. So, because this woman represents a stereotypical English graduate student, your mind just naturally goes there. The most famous example of the representative heuristic at work is a story about a woman named Linda. And you'll have seen this in the book, but I'm going to repeat it here because it is useful. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy in college. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice. She also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Do you have a picture of Linda in mind? Good. Now, which of the following is most likely true? Linda is an elementary school teacher. Linda is active in the feminist movement. Linda is a bank teller. Linda works in a bookstore and takes yoga classes. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Now, statistically, most people you hit with this question answer E. Did you? Probably not, because your shields are up. Because I'm talking about seductive bullshit, right? But if you'd been hit with this out of thin air, you probably would have answered E, because most people do. And here's the problem with that. How can the likelihood that Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement be more likely than that Linda is a bank teller? Here's the Venn diagram of that, right? Bank tellers are all in this circle, and then people active in the feminist movement are in this circle. If you're going to be in both circles, there can't be a larger percentage chance that Linda is in the is both of those things than that she's one of those things. Now, everyone understands this. People understand that bank tellers who are active in the feminist movement is a subset of bank tellers and of people who are active in the feminist movement, and that no subset can be larger than the parent set. People get the answer wrong because the description of Linda is representative of what they think a person like that should look like. System 1 shoots them right to that answer, and they say it. The familiarity heuristic. Example, Bob's taking a multiple guess midterm. Question 7 has him stumped, but he has a good feeling about C, Martin Van Buren, so he marks it, and then he arrives home and realizes that that's because he just moved into a house on Van Buren Street, and it sounded comfortable and familiar. Right, familiarity does not always breed contempt. In fact, it usually does not. That's kind of I don't know what. Probably in some circumstances it does breed contempt, but usually it breeds comfort and trust. When following this shortcut, we go with whatever feels familiar to us. And again, like most of these heuristics, in a neutral world, it works great because most of the time, that's what you're going to see. If you think about it, if any of you guys have ever, anything about hunting, people will do turkey calls or whatever I don't know what you do to make a turkey come to you, but you make that noise and the turkeys come and you shoot them. The turkey is using a heuristic that has throughout time told him that when he hears someplace, that's because there's a hen turkey there that wants to get frisky with him. So he follows the heuristic and gets shot. Because you are manipulating his world. You're manipulating his heuristics. You're using his instincts, his heuristics against him. That's why this is so important for bullshit detecting, because, bullshit entrepreneurs are out there using your heuristics to reel you in. Not that you guys are all turkeys, but, familiarity heuristic. An experiment in the University of Michigan demonstrated the familiarity heuristic. I am skeptical of this example, but it is given and I pass it forward without comment other than that I am skeptical about it. The researcher supposedly placed a series of display ads in the student newspaper on the front page, each ad containing a single Turkish word. Hardly anybody knows Turkish. Apparently it's a beautiful language. I have a friend who actually speaks it. I wouldn't have a clue. But anyway, some days the words were run only once. On other times they were run on 25 different days. At the end, the researchers did a survey on the students and given a list of words with all the Turkish words in it. Did they think the words meant something good or something bad? And the more times a given word had run in the paper, the more likely the students were to guess that it was something good. There's many flags on this. I would hesitate to depend on that example for several reasons. For one thing, how do you get an ad on the front page of a student newspaper in the 1980s, 1990s? You don't. They don't. The real estate's just not available. Secondly, people don't read ads. I mean, no. I don't think that. I think that was measuring something else. But we'll talk about bullshit academics later. But it's ringing those bells. Anyway, okay, so we've gone over the major categories of heuristics now. And there are others. There's the effort heuristic, there's the fluency heuristic, there's the scarcity heuristic, and so forth. What they have in common is the shortcutting of the full process of thinking in favor of something quick and dirty. It's an instinct. It's a subroutine. It's, hear the turkey call, go see the turkey. There is one more heuristic that I want to talk about because it's going to segue into the availability cascades thing, which we need to talk about next. And that is the availability heuristic. In this one, we make decisions based on how easily an example is called to mind. So here we have Bob's mom reads about a sadistic child killer in Florida, and now she won't let him leave the house. The other example, in a study at the University of Oregon Psychology Department, when Daniel Kahneman was visiting there as a professor, respondents estimated that you were 300 times more likely to die of a car accident than diabetes. In fact, you are 4 times more likely to die of diabetes than a car accident, but accidents get lots of news coverage, so examples of them come readily to our minds. That is the availability heuristic, and it's bad enough by itself. I mean, when you mix it into the context of mainstream of society, but when you mix it in with an information cascade, then you have a potential for some pretty weird stuff. Now let's talk about what an information cascade is. Why is this not organized right? I shouldn't be talking about association and priming right now. Okay, so we're going to circle back to the availability cascade because this is some slides out of order. So I have to tell you about these things. So let's throw it into park, and we're gonna backfill a couple things, and then we'll circle back to information cascades. The association principle, the idea that one thing reminds us of another thing. Bob has been feeling grumpy all day, then he remembers Tony Robbins' advice and plasters on an old happy grin. After a few minutes, he realizes he's actually starting to feel better. Somebody's calling me. Decline the call and figure that out later. Bob's lunch keeps disappearing out of the fridge. He pastes a picture of Morgan Freeman looking disapproving on the back wall of the fridge, and his lunch stops disappearing because the person who's stealing his lunch associates the picture of an authoritative person like Morgan Freeman staring at him with being less comfortable sneaking Bob's lunch. So yeah, the associative principle. If we associate a big smile with happy times in our lives, so if we plaster one over the old map, it reminds us of those times and lifts our mood. We drive slower after a visit to Grandpa in the retirement center because we're sort of primed to behave more like an old person, and we gamble more recklessly in Vegas after the noises of the machine next door remind us of that one time we scored $200 worth of nickels. This one can be turned in the service of evil if you can figure out how to get people to associate something useful with your point or your opponent's point. Right? The glittering generalities propaganda technique tries to use the associative principle. Priming is more along the lines of poisoning the well. The idea of priming is that exposure to a thing can make you more likely to think of or do another thing unconsciously. Priming is what subliminal advertising was supposed to do. Flash a picture of a delicious bucket of popcorn on the movie screen for such a short time, you don't consciously notice it, but now you're primed for eats. Kahneman mentions one in which people were primed for an interaction with a screensaver of dollar bills, and the people primed that way sat further away from the interviewers and were less helpful when an assistant accidentally dropped a handful of pencils later. Priming is an effect that exists, but for some reason, priming studies, social scientific priming studies, are a frickin' bag of snakes. And I would advise you to categorically disbelieve all academic priming studies unless you have good reason to do otherwise, because they seem to be more susceptible to deliberate research misconduct and accidental pollution of data than any other kind. Some of them are just obviously and blatantly stupidly horrible. There was one that found that voters who see an American flag on election day are more likely to vote Republican than ones who don't see an American flag, obvious implication being that the Republican Party is the real American Party and that the Democrat Party, as the hardcore Republicans like to refer to the opposition, is, I don't know, the party of communism, whatever. Anyway, it's still getting a lot of airplay on Fox News. It turned out to be impossible to replicate. That's kind of the key. If your priming study can't be replicated, it's probably bullshit. Kahneman actually retracted several pieces of his book that deal with priming studies because the data is so polluted with errors and the fruits of bad actors. So keep that in mind when we're talking about priming. It's a real thing, but it's hard to know because the data is polluted. Cognitive ease is the concept that salespeople types know very well. If you are comfortable and relaxed and not near the edge of your comfort zone, you will be more likely to say yes to stuff. That is why they try to get you to chat about things and answer yes to a lot of questions before they hit you with the pitch. Essentially, what they're trying to do is make their message system 1 friendly. Once you have to turn on system 2, you're lots less manipulatable. So, my example here, Bob is looking for a job, but nobody's calling. He revises his resume, switches the paper from tan to baby blue, ups the font size from 6 points to 11, and rewords it so it has fewer unnecessary big words. He's hired the next week because the person who's looking at his resume is like, I can easily absorb this information about Bob's awesome. I don't have to work. Oh, what a wonderful person Bob must be. He's hired. Okay, so that's cognitive ease. You can use cognitive ease in your own communications, and I highly recommend it. You want to be easy to talk to, easy to say yes to, easy to say no to. Of course you do, but it's more important to notice when it's being deployed on you. All right, so that is the 2 slides that snuck ahead in line or whatever, and this is where I was supposed to have gotten to. Information cascades. Now I'm going to tell you what information cascades are. You know what? I'm not going to tell you what information cascades are because I'm 23 minutes into this lecture now, and you didn't sign up for an hour and 20 minutes worth of talk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about information cascades on Monday, and we're going to kind of take it from there. Because right now this is it. I mean, I've been talking to you for 50 minutes between this movie and the one before, plus the second half of that short one that I finished class with on Wednesday. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it a day and wish you a delightful weekend and a productive weekend too, because after all, it is frickin' week 8. And then when we get together on Monday, I'm going to start things off with that video, and then I'll resume talking about information cascades. And I do want to leave you with one thought. Information cascades are a social science theory that came out of the gate slightly weaponized. Cass Sunstein has a tendency to do this. He's a libertarian, and there's nothing wrong with that. I actually self-identify as a libertarian myself, although not one of those hardcore, screw the poor type people. I mean, I'm the kind of person who would like for people to be able to do the things that make them happy, and not have, someone telling them that they can't, as long as they're not hurting people and so forth. I mean, that makes sense to me. Cass is a pretty hardcore libertarian, and you see it sometimes in his research. And so it's important to know where people are coming from. But we're going to talk about information cascades, and I think you'll see what I mean. When we get together on Monday, we'll do that. With that, have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you guys in a couple of days. Okay, where's my... There it is. Oh, look at that. Now I can see me. Okay, stop recording. Okay, bye.